Hello, Professor Mickey Keenan, Professor of Behaviour Analysis, Psychology Department, Ulster University, Northern Ireland. Thank you so much for coming to our podcast. I hope you hear me okay.
I hear you fine.
Oh, thank you.
And I hope everybody can understand my accent. I'll try to talk slow.
Thank you very much. You've been in the field of ABA, Applied Behaviour Analysis, for a long time, and you work with parents. So would you like to share from your experience, what parents should be doing when they're getting their diagnosis for their children? What should they be doing first, and how we as professionals can help them to be more competent and asking questions and demanding the service?
Yeah, that's a tall order to respond, because if you were to say what parents should be doing first, straight away you'll be criticized for telling parents what to do instead of responding to parents.
Okay.
So in the field of behavior analysis, whatever you say, you're going to be damned. That's my experience. But if parents are interested to learn about the science, then they need to be educated in a way that simplifies the science and makes them interested to see the logic in something that's fairly simple in one level and provides a lot of hope in another level. But every word that I would use, even the word hope, is tinged with criticism, because hope for what? Hope to change their kid? No, hope to be able to educate the kid in a way that the parents themselves currently cannot do. That's the only reason I got involved with the whole area. My concern was the parents who were crying out for help. I wasn't focused on trying to change kids any more than any parent is focused on trying to change their kid once it's born. They're interested in helping that kid mature so that that kid can live an independent life. My wife has a lovely phrase when it comes to education. She says, we give them wings so they can fly.
Exactly.
And that's what behavior analysis does when they need wings. The parents need to guide them to learn how to step back, not be overprotective. The basic parenting encompasses the same issues. Realize that when they've heard of ABA, there are an awful lot of misinformation about the science. Provide the misinformation, would say, but he would say that, wouldn't he? And as somebody who has grown up in Northern Ireland, and I know a lot about how people misunderstand each other when they have prejudicial views on one thing or another. I'll deviate slightly. My mother was a Protestant and my father was a Catholic. So I saw both sides of the conflict in Northern Ireland, but I never expected out in the realms of psychology. I expected that special scientists open to learning from the findings of science generally. In the UK, is there a blanket, almost, there was not a ban as such, but there's a blanket misunderstanding of the whole aspect of behavior analysis that once you've made up your mind about it without having studied it, you don't want to learn anything about it. And the positions of authority where they perpetuate the myths. And then when they're in that position, why would they want to listen to an ABA person? And if they've already been would a parent want to listen to an ABA professional? So straight away, the parents have been damaged to some extent in their views of it. That's what prejudice does. That's what misinformation does. Now, what the who's once they've received the initial diagnosis, already do home programs and chat to them, find out why on earth would anybody want to use this awful thing called AB. Awful that so many professionals must be right, the parents must be deceived. As this is the mountain that these parents have to climb and the trust that they have to place in other people if they dare to investigate the nature of a science. And then the more they would investigate, the more they might find that, you know what, in 50 states in America, 50 states, the people who were behavior analysts, well, there's lots more behavior analysts in the States than there are in the UK or in Ireland, reviews were done of the research literature. And based on the findings, and this isn't just an academic review, this is for policy making, based on the findings on 50 separate occasions, they concluded there was sufficient information to justify introducing new legislation to ensure the parents can get access to ABA. Now, that says something. So if a parent hears that, and then when they're in the UK, and say, oh, don't go near that awful ABA thing, that means that all those 50 states have all got it wrong. All those 50 states have all been misinformed, and they're perpetuating nonsense that's affecting and damaging children. That's what parents have to reconcile. Who is telling the truth about what's going on here? And unfortunately, that shouldn't happen, but if there was proper education and proper sharing of information about the findings of science, parents wouldn't have to navigate that minefield.
Exactly.
But
It's very
sadly,
important. Yes.
yeah, sadly, that's the way it is in the UK.
I think,
I'm
sorry,
sorry, go ahead.
sorry to interrupt. I'm just saying it's not just UK. I think it's all over the world. There is something going on against ABA. And if when they're saying they're doing ABA, that's not ABA that we practice or we learn. So
Yeah, but that argument is hard to bat back, because think about it from another perspective. If it's happening all over the world, then maybe there's some truth in it. This is an awful thing that's best to stop.
exactly.
That's the problem. You said it. If you have engaged in malpractice or who damage kids, it's not the medical science. Unfortunately, for some reason, and this goes back to the history of psychology, behavior analysis is a dirty word, and so therefore this was the evidence at last. This is how it operates in the UK. But if you look at every parent or not, what they do in providing the love and care for their children is they engage in something that a scientist could investigate. Okay, so the parents need to learn about this perspective. What does it mean to investigate? And before I was chatting to you, I was looking up one of the slides that I've created for my classes, and I pulled out one of my opening lectures. See if I can call it up here. It's about investigating. It's about the nature of science, because behavior analysis is a natural science and is very, very different from psychology.
Exactly.
Now, the diagram I have a person standing, and behind them is a little doll that's on the floor. And I've drawn a line from the top of that person's head to the doll. And then I've drawn a line from the doll's head backwards to the, but this is all going to the left, okay, backwards in time. So this is a timeline. So from conception through to birth, and from birth up to being that adult, and from the being in that adult, the timeline continues on through to death.
Yeah. So
we're looking at living, and you count up the number of seconds that a person lives. Now, I did a quick calculation for, I think this was for a year. It was 31,500,000 seconds. That's for a year. When I multiplied that by 7, I couldn't read the figure. It was in mathematical speak. But anyway, you get the idea.
Yeah.
So what a natural science does, a natural science investigates that whole process of living, that whole process of change from conception through to death. Because as I say, there's a simple term for it called the behavioral stream. It's a stream of living. And as that person travels through time and space, they interact with the environment. And just as you watch a river flowing through an environment, you can't have the river without the environment. You need the banks of the river.
Yeah.
So to understand the river's flow, you have to understand what it flows through. And that environment could be changed to alter the direction of flow. But the two go hand in hand. That the river and the bank are inseparable. They're part and parcel of the definition. And so is a person. And another nice turn of phrase is, the skin does not separate you from the world, it connects you to it. So as you flow through time and space, you change. And you change things around you, and things around you change you. It's a two-way street. Now, whenever a scientist investigates that whole process, what they can do is a very simple process. They can, say at one point in time, so you pick any point in time as you're watching, say, let's look at the events that happened before that observation, and let's look at the events after that observation. That's what it means to investigate. So if you have a problem, well, what happened before it? You can investigate that. You can also look at what happens after, because maybe what happens after eventually becomes a thing that maintains the problem.
Exactly.
And as you explore this from a scientific perspective, you start to uncover natural laws. And one of the things that I'd written one time, when people don't like the idea that there are natural laws, I reminded them, okay, should you criticize physicists or blame them for making people stick to the earth whenever they study gravity? No, there's a phenomenon that they investigate because people interact with this phenomenon. And so whenever behavioral scientists investigate this living process, they uncover things, the regularities in life. There are patterns in life, and there are things that can be used to account for those patterns. And that's where the thinking begins. And then as soon as you start doing that, then you need evidence. So in a parenting class that I would do, and this, you can't really explain this in words, but I do what's called the shaping game. And I provide artificial consequences in a classroom environment, and I show the parents change happening right in front of them. And then we talk about the explanation for what they observed. But of course, the word explanation is a highly loaded word as well, because psychologists have different types of explanations compared to behavior analysts. An explanation is a difficult word to define. I mean, I often freak out my first year students when I first meet them. Say, right, get out your pen and paper. I want everybody, you've been studying psychology now for 6 months. Let's start off with a very simple question. Write me down a definition of an explanation. What is an explanation? And they look at each other and they look a bit freaked out. And their minds go blank, you can see it. They haven't a clue what an explanation is. They're not taught to think that way. They're taught to follow through procedures like do statistical tests, do statistics. And all of the stats that they use are about groups of people. And I remind them that, hang on a minute. So you're telling me that you study groups of people and you have no idea how to study the living process, how to study individuals, only groups of individuals? How can a group of individuals, or the consequences of studying a group of individuals, inform a single individual? Because we're all different. And there was a lovely turn of phrase that somebody used once, his name I can't remember. He said, the average human being has one testicle and one breast. And that person doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So why are students studying average groups of people when those creatures don't exist? I mean, you could stretch that further. I mean, we're pushing it to the extreme here, but there's a point to be made that when students are not taught how to think about the phenomenon that they're interested in exploring, then the methods that they use may not be the right ones to investigate. And behavior analysis takes a different approach. It says, well, we know that change happens. We know that a person, from the moment we've just been talking, so many seconds have passed, and we can look at the things that happened beforehand, the things that will happen afterwards. This can be investigated. From those investigation, things can be uncovered. That's as simple as that. And when it comes to education, a way that I would explain education to parents is to say education is about arranging experiences. Arranging experience, like I said, give them wings where they can fly. Arranging experiences so your child enjoys learning. And if your child enjoys learning, then you're a good teacher.
Exactly.
Because you have not made the child afraid of learning. You've taught the child about the wonders of life in many respects and the way that you look at life and see there's so many questions. And so welcome to planet Earth. Here's where I am. Here's what we have discovered. And I share that with you. And as you change, as you grow up, there may be experiences that you will have that I don't have. But here's how you might need to manage them. And if you run into difficulties, I'll give you some tactics for looking after yourself. That's education to me. And that's the education that behavior analysis, the perspective that they take generally. If you get into providing robotic procedures that you just plug them in and play, so to speak, which is what many teachers do who haven't understood behavior analysis, they're great at taking things off the shelf, plug and play, use the same thing for everybody. Doesn't work. But then that reminds me of the criticism of behavior analysis. Oh, you can't have one thing for everybody. Everybody's different. I say, excuse me, but the scientific method is used for everybody, but it's used differently, but the method's the same.
Exactly.
And so there's lots of little cliches that people pick up and they use that to attack behavior analysis, but they misunderstand the point of the science. How do I investigate ways to educate my child? Well, let's see what people have found. They found basic principles like reinforcement. They found basic principles like stimulus control. The parent will eventually have to learn some of these principles, but that's too early right at the start. Don't fill their head full of jargon. Give them a chance to ask questions, see videos of people in action, and then get a handle on the approach that they're taking. And then you would adapt the procedures to the needs of your own child. So that's a long-winded way of getting the parent answering, but not answering. I can't tell a parent what to do. So what is it you want little Johnny or little Mary to learn? Let's see how you're teaching. If you're not being successful, let's figure out why. And let's see if you can be more effective. But it doesn't mean to say that you don't love your child or you're not accepting your child when you're educating them. But why should they say that about behavior analysis if you find a way to be effective in your education?
Exactly. So parents would need to educate themselves.
Educate themselves, but it's knowing where to find the right educators.
Yeah,
Um,
that's important. That's the
that's
most
important.
important. Yeah.
But they need to, you know, we've met many years ago, and I was over meeting you in Wales. And what you did was organize a conference, and we had a number of people there. More of these conferences need to happen.
Yeah.
You need to bring more people in to run conferences, have the parents involved in running the conferences so that you on your own can't do it all. Parents now need to take responsibility. And over the years that I've worked with parents, I've seen some parents who really do shoulder the weight because they understand the pressure that the behavior analysts are under. But other parents, while they benefit from the work that a behavior analyst might do with their child, they see no point in helping push a movement to help other parents access the benefits that they got from the science. That's unfortunate. It's their choice, and that's the way that's the way the thing pans out. But encourage parents to realize that, you know, at some point, maybe your child needs to have more information, or you yourself need more information about the science. Because
Exactly.
you're only learning it on the sidelines, and maybe you need to be a bit more proficient. Now, within all of that, again, I was watching the TV before it came up. Well, and I was looking up at the clouds because in our house I can look out over the sea over the north coast of Ireland, and there's a lovely sunset this evening, and we can get lovely bright red sunsets. And then suddenly I was thinking about a heart. And if that was a beating heart, the thing that I'm looking at, and you're a surgeon, a heart surgeon. So you're an expert in monitoring and how to deal with the problems that may arise with this heart. That bound to mean that whenever you look at other people, you must see them differently.
Yes.
You must do. Does it mean you dehumanize them because you have a skill that they don't have? No, it doesn't. And when a parent or when people are saying, well, you shouldn't be getting parents to be scientists with their own kids, because you're cutting off the love. You get the parent to behave like a robot towards their own child. And I says, hang on a minute. What better way to show the love for your child than to be focused and in doing things the right way? As I said, you're arranging experiences. You want to get it right. You want to be not overprotective, but understand the consequences of your actions.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so it's about understanding consequences. And in many ways, behavior analysis has been described as the science of consequences.
Mhm.
And that's wrong with learning about consequences, for goodness sake. So when those psychologists who misunderstand the science are faced with that, well, understanding consequences, yeah, okay, I can get your point. And then they drift back into their own training. So basically, they have a history. They don't get much in the way of training in behavioral analysis in British universities. And in fact, we just after examiners meetings, and somebody made a point of a course that I was teaching. He says, "Why are you still using an old book written by Skinner?" I said, "Well, hang on a minute. It was re-released for a very good reason, and perhaps instead of dismissing it, maybe you would ask me why I would want to decide to use that book rather than dismissing it out of hand. Engage. And if you engage, you'll understand why I decided to use that along with other multimedia material, because it
Exactly.
addresses many social issues, many political issues that are still germane to everyday living. So Skinner opened up a can of worms that crawled out of that can and infected lots of ways of thinking, challenged it in many different ways. And that was a good thing because people now have to progress And there's a whole host of things that have happened as a result of the work that he did. You look at behavioral medicine, behavioral gerontology. You look at the UK Society for Behaviour Analysis and look at their promotional video. You hear people talking about all the areas of application of behaviour analysis. In fact, that might be a good place for parents to start. Go to UKSBA and look at their promotional video and hear the young people talk about the many areas in which they work, and then go back to the people who told you not to be bothered with this nonsense called ABA. I think, hold on a minute, somebody's wrong here.
Exactly.
And then learn to be critical, learn to be a skeptic, and be a skeptic, but be thorough in the way we than the one you were told to accept.
Thank you. Thank you, Mickey, for your detail, kind of, it's like showing the way for the parents, like how to start, what to expect and what to demand. Thank you so much for that.
Can I give you one other thing, Kenise? I'm
Sure.
flicking through my slides for that opening lecture of these students.
Sure.
This might be interesting for parents to hear. This gets at the idea of an explanation and the problems that arise with it. So I've got a graph on the y-axis, on the left-hand side. I've got the total number of disruptive behaviors. Now, these weren't kids with autism, or sorry, anybody who thinks I shouldn't be saying with autism. It's just a turn of phrase. Autistic people, autistic kids, even the language you get criticized for. So I use them interchangeably. So it had nothing to do with autism. These were kids who were removed from school because they were disruptive, and they were sent to a different school in a different locality. Okay, and the graph I'm looking at is from data collected by an undergraduate student many years ago who was interested in learning about behavior analysis. So across the number 1, 2, 3, across 5 sessions, we got a minimum of 150 disruptions in a normal period, classroom period. And then that was the first period, the first session. The second session, like maybe the next day, it went to something like 250. And averaged out about just under around 200 disruptions per session. Okay.
Session.
So now, in that little graph, this is what parents would learn. They would learn that it's possible to measure behavior. So I've now got data. And what does data do? Well, it gives you a roadmap. Because with that data, I can predict the likelihood of disruption occurring again on the next day. And for this particular group, you can imagine that over an going to level out around 150 to 200 disruptions every single day. Okay, because these were all kids who had been taken out of ordinary schools and sent to this special school because they were uncontrollable, right? So I put this up. This is one group. Then I show another graph. And I show it beside that particular graph. And I show the y-axis, same thing, number of disruptive behaviors. And this graph starts off again with 5 or 6 data points. On the first session, it's about 2 disruptions. The second session is 1, third, 3. And so over the course of 5 or 6 days, there's minimal disruptions. So you see one with a huge number of disruptions every session, and you see another graph with minimal disruptions. And then I asked the question to my students, which group of children is likely to end up in a juvenile detention center? Okay, So the data now is allowing you to project into the future. It also means you're not going to judge these kids. And they all say the first group was all that disruptive behavior. And they say that these kids have all got disruptive personalities, something about them.
Okay.
Okay? Something about these kids that makes them disruptive. Maybe it's genetic, maybe whatever. Okay? They'll come up with some sort of explanation. They say it's a very interesting explanation for the difference between these two sets of kids. Then I tell them, you know what? I told you a lie. These are the same kids. It was called the baseline. Nothing was done. We just observed them. That line on the graph. And this is where the intervention happened. And we reduced that disruptive behavior substantially.
So those are
Now,
baseline and after intervention, right? Yeah. So the same children.
and then there was an intervention. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same children. 200 disruptions. Then we have an intervention to see if we can all that intervention produced that on the graph was 1, 2, 3 intervention, because that was the goal of the intervention to try to reduce. A couple of questions here. Why did it take an undergraduate student to go in to do something for her undergraduate dissertation with me supervising it before results? Because the teachers didn't produce those results, that student did. What was it? What were they thinking was the explanation for the behavior that happened every day in their class? They allow that to continue.
Exactly. Yeah.
What did they do? Because they're evidently they were not successful. Now, behavior, technically, it's called punishment. Let's look at this word punishment for a second, because many parents will read what we did there. Instead of shouting at the kids, creating unpleasant experiences for them, we taught them or who can be best behaved. It's called the good behavior game.
Yeah.
Prize for the teams, and we made it so that both teams, split the class teams, would get a reinforcement at the end for trying and for reducing the behavior. And it worked a treat. And the kid each day was, we played the same game again today, or to play this. And then other teachers, are you going to do it in my class? So the teachers heard about this game throughout the school, and all the kids enjoyed playing it, and it reduced the behavior. So technically, that's called punishment, but there was only reinforcement used. So to say that behavioralists only use punishment is completely misunderstanding the language of the science, which is unfortunate. And sometimes that comes through careless teaching, because the teachers, the cultural context in which they teach, and the already existing negative connotations about the science. So you have to tread carefully when you come into a different culture. You have to tread carefully, knowing that the teachers will have been taught basic psychology, and in their basic psychology, Skinner maybe touched upon in one or two, and maybe a half a dozen pages, is all about rats and pigeons, and nothing else. So why did I want to follow that guy? All he ever did was train animals. And I think, well, hold on a minute. You said all he ever do was training animals, but this is a result we got, and you weren't able to produce that. I think you need to hold fire for a second and reflect on why there's not much more written about behavior analysis in that textbook that you were taught with. It's because the people don't understand it, because it was never taught to them. And so what you have is a culture of misinformation, like Chinese whispers, that goes through the academic world. And I faced it throughout my academic career. You're automatically seen as the person in the white coat with a cattle prod doing nasty things to people. And it's hard to fight against that, because if that's why people have been taught, then no matter how much you object to that, you're already tarred with that particular image, and it's hard to undo it. Parents need to know that. Now, the other problem that I keep going on to the experiences as parents learn this stuff, once they get a handle on it and they try it out with their kids to learn how to identify learn how to think about measurement, the benefits of measurement, as they get into it, they'll be saying, why wasn't I taught this before? How come if only some other parent told me, and if it hadn't been for that parent, I wouldn't be doing this? Why was I not told this at the point of diagnosis, so that I'd be given an option? Do I want to get this ABA or something else? Well, if you want to take something else, why not ABA? What's the evidence base? Well, as I said, you can go to those 50 states and ask them for the evidence base for introducing legislation, or you can go to something else which sounds sexy. It sounds cuddly. You want to be nice to your kid. Well, who doesn't? Just because a behavioral analyst or a heart surgeon knows how to see things differently, it doesn't make them any less of a person and unable to love their child or the children around them. And it's the precision required in their education that they're focused on. But when a parent gets into it, and we run into this problem in Northern Ireland, parents, I was running classes for groups of parents, and they were all making progress. And I hadn't been taught about autism. I knew how to teach. And I knew how to teach parents who wanted to learn. But their kids were making progress. And then I got into trouble over this. The main autism charity in Northern Ireland is called Autism NI. And they rebranded themselves as Northern Ireland's Autism Charity. They gave themselves that name. And they wanted to know, who was this new kid in the street? Come and interview this guy. I never got any support from them. I've had nothing but obstacles. And one of the things that's happened from parents once they're doing this, he's misinforming those parents. He's holding up hope when there shouldn't be any hope. He's raising their hopes unfairly. And I said, I'm teaching them. And if they make progress, they make progress. How far can they get their kid? How well can this kid behave? Just like any athlete, how well can he? How far they enjoy being the athlete or whatever. But when progress that the kids made at home, they won't. The schools wouldn't allow the behavior analyst inside the door. It's information about the science. We can't have that awful thing in here. Had data to show, here's my kid before, here's my kid during the program, and here's the progress he or she has made. And there's video clips. All this data. Will you look at it? No, I can't be looking at that. Data, you won't find any. Well, in most of them anyway, in Northern Ireland, there's no data. They might have something at the end of a week or at the end of a month. There's no the effectiveness of teaching. And parents have told me that many of these schools just became sophisticated babysitting services. Kid, not empowering my kid, and yet I was making progress and learns nothing the whole day, and actually they're undermining the home program. Into behavior analysis, they need to know there's politics involved at the school level as well. They might get excited about the possibility of now being empowered to teach their kid, but they need to know it may be an uphill struggle to get the school on board as well. They need to know that. But at that point, that's where parents need to organize themselves into groups. And you need to listen to some videos. And there's one in particular, and you can get hold of her video at the Behaviour Analysis Resource Centre in Queen's University in Belfast that my wife, Carola Dillenberger, works at. So Carola's managed to pull together a whole library of video clips from professional talks. But there's one of the people on there. I have been working with her on and off. Now her name is Lisa Blakemore, not a behaviour analyst, but she is the one person that has been representing parents in ABA. And we've been helping Lisa with information, direction, and ways to combat the misinformation she encounters in tribunals. Talk, but it's this horrendous talk, and it puts her under an awful lot of stress having to deal with the non-paid professionals who are doing something for an education authority because they want to get in this ABA. It might be costing the authority too much. Well, everybody who was trained in it, it's the fact that they're not trained, that they have to pay people outside the education. There's the problem.
Yes.
So Lisa Blakemore, I can send you the link to Lisa's talk after the podcast, and you can share it with parents.
Yes, please. Yeah, that would be.
Yeah, and the link to a number of really interesting talks, but all of this stuff's in there. And there's a talk I've given in Stormont, looking at ways to help parents. But I look at the politics, and I look at some animations when I explain the science. And I start off with a visual illusion. And the first argument really is, it is possible to be deluded. Let's make that the starting point. Biologically, it is possible to be deluded because of our visual systems, the way we're made. Now, nothing to be scared about that. It's interesting. But when you take the lessons from that into education, it is possible to be deluded by misinformation. And when you're deluded by misinformation, you'll do everything in your power to maintain that perspective, because maybe you spent a career fighting that holding that perspective, and you won't want to let go of it. And it's possible to be deluded. So there's so many issues in my talk. I'll send you the link to that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to cut across you there. Sometimes when I start, I can't stop.
No, it was really useful. Everything, just like eye-opening. I think parents would appreciate, the information that you gave. I notice even in UK there is a groups called Autism Parents Group. That's on Facebook group.
Yeah.
But they actually categorically banned any post regarding ABA. So my question is, why is that among parents? Why is that kind of, they don't want to include ABA. They just feel that's like an awful thing to be doing. Is that based on some kind of experience, or is it something the authorities asking them? Or
It's a cultural phenomenon.
okay,
It's a cultural phenomenon. You know, and what's interesting is that conditioning. Little do they know it, but they're evidencing the. And one of the reasons to be interested in conditioning is because it's so powerful. We need to know when it's working. And when you block out something to that extent, that's a very powerful piece of behavior, and it evidences very agencies that maintain that behavior. So that's what conditioning can do to people. It can leave them thinking like that. And then in the process, what do? Well, they put in a punishment procedure.
exactly.
Consequences for parents who may want to talk about something. Behavior analysts are doing, they're actually doing it.
Yeah.
They're on something, and instead of opening up questions about why is it that I've decided to behave in this way? What is the information that I have, and how does that compare to alternative forms of information? Where have I been misguided? I mean, let me give you another couple of examples from that opening lecture of mine. They're a little bit related, okay, but you'll see the drift that I was taking. Okay, so imagine I've got that picture of the child and the person with the line joining them and the stream of changes. So underneath that picture, I've got this heading. When a child comes into the world, his or her social environment is already organized. It follows from this that many wide-ranging questions are relatively easy to address. So, for example, we could ask the following range of questions. And some of my questions you can see come from the living in Northern Ireland. The first one, is it possible to educate a child to defend their faith as either a Catholic or a Protestant or a Hindu, etc., etc., etc.? Is it possible to do that? It's a rhetorical question because the answer is yes, because it happens all over the world. Okay, they will defend their faith. Is it possible for a child to be affected by experiences so that he or she is later able to feel justified in killing another human being? It happens all over the world. And in fact, many armies train their soldiers to do that.
Exactly.
Is it possible to train a child in such a way that he or she will defend the habit of collecting pieces of paper and bits of metal? Now, when I asked that to the class, they're looking at me, what the hell is he on about? Is he on some sort of drugs or what's going on here? Then I start rattling the coins in my pocket and I pull out some money. He says, see this stuff here? That's called money. I was taught that when I was a kid, this piece of paper and this little round thing. But you know what? It's just a piece of paper and a bit of metal. But it's very hard for you to see that as the money. That's the power of conditioning, to use that term very loosely. Is it possible for a child to be affected by experiences that he or she of being depressed, of being frustrated? Is it possible to be affected by experiences so that they're left? That's why we have to learn what were those experiences and or protect them from those experiences. That's called the science of consequences. That's what it is. It possible? Is it possible to arrange circumstances in such a way that a person views the word train when applied to people as very shallow and dehumanizing, as the word is used in behavior analysis. Oh, it's very shallow and dehumanizing. We're people. That's interesting. If I look in a mirror, I don't see myself as treating the image as being very shallow. I will treat that person in the mirror in a very kind way.
Yeah.
Right? I don't see them as a machine. Okay, but I may be interested, like that heart surgeon, how they operate. I may be interested in the experiences he may have to go through. And maybe I wish I had somebody by my side if I'm doing something I find difficult. So these are the types of questions that arise whenever you start to see the power of consequences, that people are left so heavily trained in the conclusions that they have about something, that they will institute or they will implement punishment consequences for daring to step outside the norm. And that's what those groups have done. They're using the worst, like Clockwork Orange type of scenario, using the worst of behavior analysis as they see it. We're going to control you guys because we don't want that.
Thanks.
But that's what they think behavioralists do. Weird.
Thank you, Vicky. If you have time, I'd just like to ask you one more question.
Now you're frozen on me, Kenise, you might have to start again.
I'm just asking if you have time, I would like to ask you one more question.
Okay.
In terms of changing what's happening in the United Kingdom as a whole, not Northern Ireland, where do we change? Where do we start? Because do we start training, educating the authorities, the people sitting on top, or are we going to educate the parents and build that strong force to change the policies? Or are we concentrating on good practice so we can show the evidence and influence that way?
Well, yes to all of those.
Okay, good.
Yes to all of those, because there's never a single magic bullet. You know, it's to change all of that there, it's a big calling. But transparency is at the heart of change. Now, the paper that I wrote recently criticizing the British Psychological Society, and I'm a fellow of the British Psychological Society, so I think I can rightly criticize it without saying I'm biased. I'm a fellow, but I'm also a fellow of the Association for Behaviour Analysis International, so I've straddled both sides of the Atlantic. If you have to be strategic. There's that old phrase, if you keep doing what you're doing, you'll keep getting what you're getting.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're not being successful, let's have a look and see what it is that you're doing. And that's what every parent should think about as well. If you keep doing what you're doing, you'll keep getting what you're getting. So time to change. You have to be strategic. So you need to have a group of people who are prepared to be strategic in decision making, but you have to have a number of things going on simultaneously. Now, some things don't work, and I thought they would. I can be a little bit green sometimes, a bit naive. I remember at one point there was a radio show who see themselves as the biggest show in the country. Okay. And so I organized it for myself and Carola Dillenberger, my wife from Queens. and another colleague to go down to the BBC in Belfast to the studio where the show's broadcast and to meet and to tell them the story of what's going on with autism and ABA. Now, the guy who hosts the show wasn't there, but his sidekick was there. And we talked and explained it and talked. And it turns out, oh, it's too big a story. It wouldn't go down in sound bites. It's too big a story. So it was too big a story for the biggest show in the country. So that fell in his face. One where I did have success was the establishment of the master's course at Coleraine. That arose through conversation with a grandparent who had been using the services from the charity that I helped to set up called Pete. And Pete has since struggled. We've no professionals on board anymore to help. We're trying to get off the ground again, so we're struggling. And by the way, I'll send you a link also to the only online multimedia, multilingual tutorial in behaviour analysis that we developed in Northern Ireland. It's free. So I always make sure the parents can access to free education. So I'll send you the link for that. So they just have to log in and register, and they get a multilingual. It's in a number of languages. You can see for yourself, but it's a basic tutorial in behavior analysis with videos and animations, a whole host of things to help explain the science. So the grandparent, whenever I was running my courses, I ran classes for parents on my own in the university on a Saturday. And I did it for a year in my own time, unpaid. I didn't want to take any money. I already had a job, didn't charge parents anything. And he said to me at one point, Mickey, do you get any support for what you're doing? And I was a little bit coy. I said, actually, no, I don't get any support. And he was angry at that. Does he mean to say the university is not helping you? I says, no. And it was like a red rag to a bull. He dropped the university. He happened to be a solicitor. He dropped the university an email or a letter on headed paper, and he gave off stink about the university and its pride and outreach to the community when it knows there's something happening in the community, that these kids are being failed, and what are they going to do to address this? Because he doesn't see anything other than the actions of one academic doing it on his own. Now, you can imagine that put me in a bit of an awkward situation, but it was the truth. So anyway, to cut a long story short, I was called aside by the provost of the campus, and I had to go out for the chop now. And he said, Mick, I didn't know how to respond to this letter. I said, well, there's not a lot of angry parents out there. I mean, one particular angle, it's something to invest in, because you would have students coming to help these parents. And I said, well, what we need is a master's course, and we need a treatment and research center. He said, I can't promise that. He said, so he said, I can't promise that. That was my Alexa talking there. So I can't promise that. So he sat on it for a while, but of course, sitting on it for a while made the grandfather more angry. Eventually, a meeting was called, and I wasn't sure how to handle this, but he had the dean, the pro-vice chancellor of the campus, the head of school, the little boys' parents that I had worked with, a host of high-powered people, and he read the riot act to them. And it's only because of that we had the master's course. Only because of that. So there are times when parents need to get angry. Pick your targets. Get them to explain themselves. Get them to look at the evidence of what they're ignoring. Hold them to account in terms of their mission statement of the university. That's one possibility. So there's getting it into the universities, but parents, as I said earlier, parents need to come together and join and be a force and bring over the professionals who work on a daily basis with kids with autism. I don't do that because we can't get a school. We have nothing, right? We have nothing, and our students can't get placements. I have some of the students were telling me there was a particular place set up by the government to deal with autism, and the student was going to do the placement there, and there were other students who'd done our master's course. Said, don't mention ABA, or it'll be open up a can of worms. So ABA is a dirty word, don't mention it. So the only possibility that some of them have is a placement that I made happen for them in Boston, in the New England Center for Children. So every year they take some of our students over and provide them for a year's training, or with a year's training. So there are charities like the National Autistic Society who say not very nice things about ABA. There are organizations within like the BPS, and they're unaccountable. Nobody provides consequences for them. Consequences change behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Who are the parents providing consequences? Who are the media that could be used? The problem with the media is that you have no control over what they write, and quite often they get it wrong. They say this ABA therapy. It's not a therapy, it's a science, it's a scientific discipline. And as a scientific discipline, it works for a whole host of different issues. So stop talking about it as a therapy and get your facts right. So don't trust the newspapers, but you might want to use them if they care, if you have somebody who's trustworthy. But then you've also got opportunities I would see nothing wrong with inviting people to have debates. Now, you could have the head, the president of the Association for Behaviour Analysis International to have a debate with the president of the British Psychological Society.
That would be interesting, yes.
Wouldn't that be interesting? Make that a public event to say, well, is this ABS that's the awful thing that you say it is? Let's have a public debate. Now, I think that would work. Okay, it wouldn't work in Northern Ireland because it's too small. Make it happen in what we call the mainland. Make it happen over where you're living, and see who turns it down. And when people turn it down, you've got a story. You have to go fishing, because remember that when people ignore you, that's a response. Don't just take it as they're ignoring you. That's a response that you could draw on a graph. How many people are going to ignore me? I've got a story now. I'm going fishing. I'm catching all these big fish who are ignoring me. Everybody's turned it down. But of course, you'll get some arrogant so-and-so who will enjoy it, and they will get blown to pieces by some of the top-notch behavioral analysts in the States. Let them come. Set them up and let them be blown out of the water by the misinformation about behavior analysis. Parents could organize that.
I will try to do that.
I think that would be a good one.
Yes.
Now, let me give you an example of what happened. You remember I talked about that Autism NI, Northern Ireland's autism charity?
Yeah.
Well, the parents in our master's, or not the parents, the students in our master's course once wrote to the chief executive officer, inviting her to come along and give a talk as to why the organization didn't sign a petition organized by parents who basically said, services not imposed, but we want the option. And this charity wouldn't sign the petition. Okay? Now, it so happens that this person, the CEO at the time, had received an honorary degree from my university for her work on autism. So you can see it's a bit of an awkward place I'm working in.
Yes.
So she was invited by the students to come along and give a talk as to why, what was the problem with ABA? Explain it, because we're studying this, we're paying for this, it's expensive. Give us a talk to tell us what the story is. And she declined. Now, the course director thought about it and we chatted. And the result of that was he drafted a letter to her and said, look, in many respects, these are your students because you're an honorary doctorate of the university. And can I ask you to reconsider? Just explain this because they want to learn. The result of that email, and the email was actually copied to the Vice Chancellor at the time. So it was all open and transparent. The result was a complaint was made against him for writing an aggressive letter. She didn't come along. So that told us something. The students learned something. That's what you're up against. And there's no accountability there.
Exactly.
There's no accountability. And they get away with it. And parents are so beaten down by the struggle that they're in that they have an energy to fight on a different level. But fight they must, but they will also get help. There are many people out there who want to help them. Right? You just need to find the people. I mean, I can connect you with many behavior analysts. But you must make an event happen. And in a sense, you must get your foot soldiers in place, get them trained up to be able to be well educated to challenge the misinformation. And do it that way and monitor the progress that you're making. Collect data on your successes. Parents who do home programs, ideally, and that means there's all sorts of ethical questions here, right? If you're doing a good home program, do you want to show a video of your kid? Problem with that is, depending on who's providing the services, it could be seen as soliciting for money for the organization who's doing the work. And that's the problem as well. I mean, I unfortunately I didn't realize that there are some behavioral analysts also who are part of the problem. They see dollar signs or pound signs, and their focus is on making money, and that complicates the matter. Then you have the PBS people as well, who never stand up for ABA. We're quite happy to promote this business that they've set up called PBS, and I've written a paper on that I can share with parents.
That is shocking. That is shocking.
It's terrible. And so there are a lot of people who, as I've said, are quite happy to do research with kids in autism or about autism. So the kids become the fodder for their publications, but they're not prepared to lift a hand to fight alongside the parents to get access to the science. I have no time for that. It makes me very angry. Parents should get angry. There's nothing wrong with it. It gets you focused. This is enough is enough. You know, the things that have happened in the UK recently with the post office, you know, and all the things that have happened, it continues to happen at many different levels.
Exactly, yeah.
And just one last thing, actually, going back to this neurodiversity movement as well. We published a paper, and myself and Crola declared to be on the neurodiversity spectrum. Insofar as every human being is different, every human being is on that spectrum. So we're not members of a particular club. We're scientists, and we're different from the people who parade themselves as neurodiverse, who are anti-ABA, and say, well, we think differently from you, you think differently from us. You've got this double empathy issue that you want to set up to be important. Well, you have to respect us just as much as we have to respect you. And in fact, if you read anything I've ever written, it's nothing but respect for people. So how dare you criticize me and lump me in with these other behavioral analysts who may have been somebody who was guilty of malpractice? Check your facts before you criticize the whole science. And you can then also challenge some of these neurodiverse people and say, right, design for me an educational program that does not arrange consequences. I'd love to see it. And tell me how you would collect the data and what principles are behind it. Because you will find that you cannot interact with people without providing consequences, which is what the science investigates. So what are you talking about? Now, if you have no need for a behavioral analyst, fine. Long may you live. But when there are kids who need some help, the parents need the help to educate their kid. That's just come at it from that angle. If the parents need help to educate their kid, what are you going to do to help them? Could you devise an educational program? Can you? I mean, there are many behavioral analysts in the States who are also autistic. They have nothing wrong with being autistic and doing ABA. Invite some of those people over to defend ABA.
Exactly.
So the nonsense that is written is just pure nonsense. And I'm quite happy to say that to the day I die, because they will not engage with the understanding of the nature of the science, and they misinform other people about the nature of the science. And the best measure of that is, can they design an educational program for a kid that does not involve consequences for that kid? Impossible. So do you let the kid be because you don't want to change them? Well, hang on a minute. As I said in a paper, one of the papers we wrote recently, that means every parent should apologize for daring to not be trained their kids because we changed you. You wanted to mess all over the place. I shouldn't have forced you into wearing or to using a nappy. I shouldn't have toilet trained you. Do it where you want to do it. You know, hold on a minute. You're welcome to the world, but sometimes there are rules that people have decided are the rules. You have to adapt. Other people also have to adapt. It's all about give and take. That's all it is. But don't demonize a whole science. Get at the people who are demonizing the kids or whatever. But why on earth demonize a whole science when you haven't even understood it or studied it?
Exactly. Thank you so much, Nikki. It was just eye-opening talk, and I have learned. Every time I speak to you, I learn so many things.
Well, I do my best, Denise.
Yes, and
But I'm still struggling. I wish to God something positive would happen, but to get a breakthrough. When at the minute with these politicians, the politicians won't meet with us. We had one politician who was the Minister for Health at the time. We managed to get him invited over to New York to go to Autism Speaks headquarters to listen about the evidence base for ABA. Now, it so happened he was going on his way to the States anyway, but it's a long story. But anyway, I was given a photograph of him sitting in the headquarters of Autism Speaks with Laurie Unum.
Yeah.
And I then wrote to this Minister for Health, and I requested a copy of the minutes of that meeting. He was there with his entourage. Oh, sorry, no minutes were taken.
That's strange.
Isn't that very strange?
It
No
shows
minutes were
how
taken.
important that meeting was for him.
Yeah. Or maybe it was a way of saying, I'll bury my head in the sand and not face up to what's going on here.
Exactly.
And what redress do we have?
It's a struggle. It's a struggle, continuous struggle
Yeah.
for parents, for behavior analysts. And, as you say, that for few malpractice of few behavior analysts, and the whole science has been ignored completely.
Not just ignored, demonized, actively
Demonized.
demonized. And then when the PBS people kick in as well and allow that to happen and don't speak up for their brothers in arms, so to speak.
Exactly. So it's a strange time, I think.
It's a strange time indeed.
So we do need to fight back. We need to get together.
But you have to be strategic.
Yes.
Yeah. Use a little bit of the science that you know and say, right, let's collect some data. Let's write, see how many times I get turned down. But keep that at one strand and make it interesting. Otherwise, it wears you down. Because you're going to be doing something else with another person. Try that one. See how many times. You can draw a graph with that. Then when you come to tell a story, what a great story. Look at how many times I've done this.
Yes. That would be lovely. I will keep fighting, and I will follow your lead.
But don't you fight on your own, otherwise you'll exhaust yourself.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so we'll speak to you again.
Okay, Kenise.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you take care now. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.